Hello and welcome back to Cult Leader. I'm your cult leader, Spencer Henry, and Cult Babes, there's a new intentional sect on the horizon. You already know what that means. Today, we are talking about a group that is not exactly a cult, but it's also not a cult. I mean, many people have referred to them as a separatist group, but if it walks like a cult and it quacks like a cult, I mean, come on. But honestly, what do you call it? When you're building a community around pulling away from the rest of society, making your own rules and deciding who gets in and who doesn't based on your extremist views, you're circling the bowl of the cult logic toilet, whether you like it or not. Now, rural America has always been sort of a magnet for types of people like this. And I'm not speaking ill at all about rural America. It's just typically where a group like this tends to go. When a group decides that the world is broken and they're done dealing with it, they don't move to a big, bright city. They don't think, hey, how can I make local changes where I live? They're not going to town hall, all right? No. Instead, they all pack up, head somewhere quiet, somewhere cheaper, somewhere where perhaps laws aren't as strict. Neighbors mind their business, somewhere you can buy a lot of acreage without anyone asking too many questions. A ranch, a compound, a homestead, or if you're mega wealthy, you might gather up your group of friends and go buy a private island. It's happened before. But if you start pulling on the thread of these quote unquote separatist movements in the US, these little groups or cult juniors, one region pops up again and again, and it's pretty interesting. It's the Ozarks. Northern Arkansas in particular has a long history of this kind of thing because over the years, lots of different hate groups, for lack of a better word, like the Covenant, the Sword, and the Arm of the Lord, Kingdom Identity Ministries, neo-Nazi group White Revolution, and even the most infamous hate group, the KKK, have all taken turns staking their stupid little flags into the ground out there. Obviously, this is not the collective feeling of everyone in Arkansas. This just happens to be a common ground for a lot of these groups. And once you look at the map, it honestly makes sense. It's very isolated. Land is much more affordable in comparison to other places. Zoning laws are loose and oversight is minimal, which is probably like a key component here. So that is exactly where a group calling itself Return to the Land decided to, recently return to the land. And the name sounds almost wholesome at first, like a homesteading YouTube channel, right? We're going to teach you how to grow your food in raised garden beds. Oh, today's video is all about learning how to keep bees. And don't forget to make your own sourdough starter kit this week. I mean, that Nara Smith type of vibe. We've seen a resurgence of homesteading in recent years, but that's not what this group is. No. We've got something much more sinister on the horizon today. Return to the Land, often called RTTL, it's their initials, really creative, I know. Groundbreaking journalism, Spencer Henry. But they are a white nationalist private membership organization that now owns more than 160 acres near Ravenden in northern Arkansas. And they have begun developing what they call European Heritage Intentional Communities. Quack, 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 quack. In plain terms, whites only, okay? Yes, babes, in the year of our Lord 2026, that label is still getting slapped onto things. So how is this legally and functionally possible, and should it be allowed? These are all questions that naturally arise when you hear about a group like this, right? Well, if somebody wants to join this group in particular, Return to the Land, and be part of their community, they can't just show up and buy a house. First, they have to apply, and then there's an interview process and screening of personal backgrounds, and then they decide collectively if the applicant is a quote-unquote good fit. If they're white and aligned in their ideology enough, they're accepted. But they don't technically buy property the normal way. It's not like, okay, I'm going to go purchase a home with a mortgage from a bank or even get a deed to the property. Instead, what these people are doing who are joining Return to the Land is they are buying a share in the private membership company that owns the land. The company then gives them the right to live on a specific piece of it. The next obvious question that comes up is, well, why? Why do it that way? Well, because by structuring it as a private club that owns land instead of a real estate development selling homes, they can legally control who gets to live there. And this is the biggest part of it all. They can claim, oh, this isn't housing discrimination. This is a private membership community. It's a legal workaround for fair housing restrictions. And it's not the first time that this type of hateful thought process has come to fruition. I mean, if you look at the history of most country clubs in America, for instance, a lot of the ones that date back decades and decades and decades, a lot of times you'll see the same sort of exclusivity. Like, we want white Anglo-Saxon people, right? They want like the waspy crowd. They're not interested in the melting pot of America. They're not trying to bring others in from their community to maybe share culture over a day at the driving range. They just want classic segregation, or wanted. Most of them, even though are sadly recent, have opened their doors to others. So whose idea was this for Return to the Land? Who's the cult leader? Who decided the solution to modern America was building a whites-only settlement in the Ozark Hills? It's a good question, and I'm glad you asked. His name is Eric Orwal. And if you're picturing some backwoods militia stereotype with the Duck Dynasty beard and, I don't know, January 6th fashion sense, that's not him, okay? He looks more like he would be a background actor on the television show The OC. In fact, Eric grew up right there on the border of OC in La Mirada, California, a suburb in southeast Los Angeles County that sits right on the Orange County border. And La Mirada was built in the 1950s and 1960s as one of those shiny new, optimistic post-war suburbs. Tract homes, fresh lawns, young families moving west to after World War II with GI Bill optimism. And at the time, it was overwhelmingly white. But by the time Eric was growing up there, times had changed and the demographics were changing with it too. What started as this predominantly white suburb in his grandparents' era had become more and more diverse as the decades passed. According to the census reports, in 1980, La Mirada was roughly 77% white. But by 1990, the year that Eric was born, that number had dropped to around 64%. And by 2000, it was now sitting at 47%. By the time Eric had grown into adulthood, the white population had fallen even further while Hispanic and Asian populations continued to grow. And Eric would later describe that transformation was what he called destabilizing. He said he felt alienated and that the town no longer felt like the one his grandparents envisioned. And definitely not what his ancestors had signed up for. God, I don't know, Eric. You're given victim. Okay. But at the time, Eric hadn't yet made being a straight white male his entire personality. Back then, he had better things to do, like music. He had an interest in classical music from a very early age, and at 18, he left California for Rochester, New York to attend the Eastman School of Music, which is one of the most prestigious conservatories in the United States. And he got a great education here. He studied the French horn and immersed himself in the works of Beethoven, Brahms, Wagner, and all the heavy hitters of the European classical canon. He also dove headfirst into philosophy, from Plato, metaphysics, Western civilization thought. He strikes me as the type he was carrying around a book, okay? A little performative, maybe. But after graduation, he went on to perform with Shen Yun, which, you guys, is a whole nother episode for a whole nother day. But Shen Yun is the Chinese touring production that advertises itself as reviving 5,000 years of civilization. And if you live in California, or I don't know where else, but I've always grown up seeing them in California. Those fucking billboards are everywhere. If not, we'll throw up some pictures. But we're going to have to go deeper into them in another episode on another day, because behind the curtain of Shen Yun is the Falun Gong movement. Falun Gong blends meditation with strict moral teachings, apocalyptic cosmology, and some very unorthodox metaphysical claims. Like, we're talking spiritual warfare, moral purity narratives, and aliens influencing humanity. But that's a whole episode by itself. Shen Yun's performances revolved around themes of lost heritage, moral decline, persecution, and restoring traditional order. The idea that civilization has fallen from something pure and must be reclaimed. Eric left Shen Yun, but clearly Some of the things throughout his time with them, parts of that ideology just really stuck with him. But before he had the idea to become the landlord, basically, of a whites-only compound, Eric went through a very different phase. In his early 20s, he was actually influenced by the so-called new atheists, especially intellectual critics of religion like Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens, Daniel Dennett, the intellectual YouTube debate darlings of the 2010s. The guys who argued that religion was irrational, corrosive, tribal, and responsible for not only extremism, but also our total collapse as a society or our societal decline. You hear that phrase a lot. Eric himself has described himself during that period as more of like a nihilist. He felt like life was meaningless, so whatever. He rejected religious morality. He embraced rationalism, science, skepticism. He was, by his own account, not particularly interested in values or a value system of types. He did get married to a girl that he met in music school and became a father, but he says he didn't believe in a Christian moral structure or civilizational hierarchy at the time. He didn't really believe in anything at the time. Well, except for showing off his hog on the internet. He did do that, which, hey, no shame in the game. Nothing wrong with that. But during that whole nihilist era, Eric and his then wife, Caitlin, streamed sex videos for paying subscribers on fan favorite website Chatterbait. Not exactly the resume line you'd expect from someone who will later position himself as the defender of Christian traditionalism and Western moral order, right? But isn't it? I mean, have we learned nothing, cult babes? He has since described that era as something he was very ashamed of. But in that time, he also had 4 babies. And by the time he was somewhere in his late 20s, that's when his views really started to completely flip. From this sort of, I don't really care, I don't know, who knows, to, no, this is exactly what I believe. And one of the explanations that he loves to give personally in interviews is that he returned to La Mirada and felt like a stranger in his own hometown. By then, the white percentage had fallen even more. And he's talked about walking around and not feeling like he fit in and being priced out due to rising property values caused by foreign investors. This frustration and blame started blending together into something more ideological. It wasn't just like, oh, I don't think these companies in foreign countries should be able to buy up all the property and drive everyone's housing prices up. It became more radical. And around that same time, his online presence started to shift. He'd been active online for a while, but the Plato lectures and Western metaphysics videos that he posted started getting some new company. He started posting more about race, about demographic decline, about what he calls civilizational identity. He started arguing that Europeans were becoming a shrinking global minority and made unfounded claims that there were inherent differences in the IQ, behavior, and temperament between races. He positioned white people as uniquely responsible for Western civilization and were inherently just better. All claims that are not supported by reputable scientific consensus, by the way, just in case anyone out there needs to hear that. He claimed that Hitler was a one-sided historical figure. He criticized interracial relationships, calling them destabilizing. Loves that word. He argued that multiculturalism weakens national cohesion and threatens what he considers authentic American identity, which is, a bad one, but, freedom of speech and all that. But especially in a country that has, from its founding, been shaped by waves of immigration, both forced and voluntary migration and cultural blending. That's the messy story of the United States, and it always has been. We're a melting pot, right? So instead of being a true American patriot and saying we need better policies for all people from all backgrounds to thrive in harmony in this country, Eric's lazy solution was, we need separation. And for someone who has studied philosophy and history and someone who claims to be such a big thinker, that seems like a pretty basic brained solution, right? Like everything bad here must leave and go start my own. I mean, at some point along this ideological evolution, if that's what you want to call it, he got the inspiration from a place called Orania, which is a small town in a dry, remote part of South Africa, far from any big cities. And this is pretty much where he got his outline for his return to the land idea. Orania has been around in one form or another since the 1960s, but the modern version of Orania was started in the 1990s, right after apartheid ended, when a group of people came together and they bought this struggling town with the goal of building their own community. Like Return to the Land, one can't just move there. They have to apply and be accepted. And a lot of people describe Orania as whites only, but only Afrikaners are allowed to live and work there. And they're expected to be Afrikaner, speak Afrikaans fluently, have no criminal record, and agree with the town's values. All jobs, from office work to construction to farming and cleaning, are done by the people who live there. They don't hire any outside labor, and they even created their own local money, called the Ora, that can be used in town stores. They've even invested in solar power to try and be energy independent. And while Orania presents itself as a self-sufficient homeland where Afrikaner culture, language, and traditions can continue without outside influence, critics say it's just apartheid with new branding. Eric, however, thought it was brilliant. He didn't see any sort of controversy. He saw it as proof of concept, like a functioning prototype, if you will. A modern example of what happens when you stop arguing online and you go build something. He actually went and visited himself recently. So anyway, this Eric guy begins openly advocating for intentionally segregated communities, like actual land with actual borders. And around 2023, he teamed up with Peter Sear, and talk turned into acreage. Peter was the operations brain, the legal structure guy, the one thinking in contracts and fair housing laws, often described as de facto number 2. Before coming to Arkansas, Peter had already experimented with intentional community living development. In Ecuador, he actually co-founded eco-villages called Fruit Haven and Terra Frutis. Those were not race-based projects. They were vegan, eco-living, off-grid style communities. But it gave him experience with shared land ownership, collective governance, alternative legal structures, and frameworks. In other words, he was exactly what someone like Eric needed. He was somebody who could build fringe communities. But all wasn't well back in Ecuador. While living there, Peter was actually arrested after stabbing a minor. He claimed it was in self-defense, and he wasn't formally charged. So it was just back to business after that. Now, this isn't Orania, South Africa, okay? We're in Arkansas. I don't know what the official laws are over there, but in the United States, you cannot openly sell whites-only housing. The Fair Housing Act of 1968 exists specifically to prevent that kind of discrimination. You can't just slap up a sign and call it a day. And that's what kind of threw a wrench in their system. That was a problem for their plan. So the project paused while they figured out how they could build this without calling it what it was, or what it is, rather. And the solution was a business structure loophole. They set up an LLC under the name Wisdom Woods and acquired over 160 acres in Arkansas, as I mentioned, near Ravenden, not really sure how to pronounce that. But here's the whole workaround. Under Wisdom Woods LLC, Return to the Land became a private membership association. So the LLC holds the land, but as I mentioned in the beginning, members don't buy property, they purchase shares in the company, and those shares are translated to homestead plots, typically around 1 to 3 acres, and they're basically paying a land membership fee. So legally, it's different from selling real estate. It's free association, meaning they're just a private club deciding who gets to join, not a developer discriminating in housing sales. But it's worth mentioning that being white is not enough. No, you can't just show up with a check. Like I touched on earlier, members have to apply through the website and complete a questionnaire. And then there's the interview process, background checks, and European heritage is evaluated. And then the board votes on who gets in. Obviously, when you have a group of guys like this, it's a very limited, small amount of people that are going to get in. Jewish applicants need not apply. Under Return to the Land's criteria, they're not considered white. Membership is also limited to heterosexual Christians and pagans of European descent. Not anyone else. No interracial couples, no interracial individuals, pure Euro-Christian whites only. Heterosexual whites only. And once you're approved, you can buy into the LLC and begin building. Eric pushed the idea and this narrative hard to his online audience. Of course, there was the traditional fear-mongering. In 2023, they started clearing trees, carving out roads, pouring foundations, building small cabins. They organized work parties, which were just weekends where residents and prospective members showed up to do manual labor. It was this whole gimmick where it's like, you help build the settlement, and in exchange, you build belonging. Think of how proud your father's fathers were. I don't know who my father's father is, but it's probably part of the problem, right? But by late 2024, there were reportedly around 40 members on site, including half a dozen kids living there full time. 4 of them, from what's been publicly reported, are Eric's from his previous marriage. And actually, his ex-wife lives on the land too. She's married to another man, a white nationalist from the community, and they have a child. The kids are all, of course, homeschooled in the community. Don't want them learning about racism in school. And one thing that keeps coming up in interviews is how they talk about education. Eric and several of the other residents have said they don't want their children growing up feeling guilty for being white. They don't want them learning narratives about slavery, segregation, colonialism, or systemic racism in ways that frame white people as historical villains. Yeah, just don't talk about it, then it never happened. They say that modern education gives white kids a negative self-concept, so they can control the curriculum with homeschooling. And that way, they can solely focus on what they see as the achievements of Western civilization and can also avoid anything they see as ideological shame or anti-white narratives. Speaking of kids, because demographic anxiety is what triggered the whole ideology, reproduction in the community is quite literally incentivized, apparently, allegedly. They offer a cash bonus program of $1,000 for each newborn born. And Eric has continued building the brand online. He's hosted conversations with controversial figures, including Nick Fuentes, a fucking loser, Holocaust minimizing live streamer, and professional edgelord whose brand of Christian nationalism blends anti-Semitism, incel politics, and this open admiration for authoritarian strongmen. Because of course, if you're going to build a whites-only community so you can grift, you gotta get in front of a specific kind of audience. Right? The two of them actually reportedly had a falling out after Eric privately messaged Nick Fuentes asking for clarification on his stance regarding birthright citizenship. I think if I remember correctly, don't quote me on this, Nick Fuentes was pro-birthright. Anyway, Fuentes publicly reacted by cutting ties with him, saying he was dead to him. And in 2026, Eric is still there. He's on YouTube calmly explaining that white demographic decline is an existential crisis. He'll look directly into the camera and tell you that voluntary segregation is not only legal, it's moral. He insists he doesn't support forced segregation. He just thinks people should be allowed to choose segregation. If other groups can organize around shared identity, religion, ethnicity, or culture, why can't whites? But here's the thing. You can. It's America. People organize around heritage and culture all the time and always have. We don't need the fear mongering. And when it's done in a healthy way, it usually isn't about whiteness or race at all. It's about specific traditions, customs, shared histories, languages, stories. I mean, there's so many beautiful cultures out there. And there's plenty of these societies that exist made up of Irish Americans or Italian American clubs, Polish heritage organizations, German cultural foundations, Greek festivals, Scandinavian groups like Sons of Norway. We've got your St. Patrick's Day parades. We've got Oktoberfest, Highland Games, Midsummer celebrations, Christkindl markets. There's language clubs, folk dance groups, genealogy societies, church feast days, Appalachian music festivals, Renaissance fairs. None of that is controversial on its own because it's rooted in culture, food, music, religion, immigration history. We all came here somehow. Regional traditions, art. These aren't groups that are organized around the abstract category of white, and they don't exist to separate from others or assert superiority. When other groups in America are coming together, I'm not threatened by that because I'm not a fucking loser, okay? I'm like, oh my God, what do you mean you're celebrating your culture here? America's a fucking melting pot, you fucking losers. So yeah, people can absolutely gather around shared heritage and ancestry. That part isn't the issue. Passing down traditions, recipes, music, stories, language. That is human. That is grounding. That is connection. That is good for the soul. Even feeling kinship when others around who relate and have those things in common, that is natural. But if you're having to tear down other groups, or you're only coming together because you believe society is collapsing because there's not only white people there, that's when it's a fucking issue. A lot of me thinks people who reduce human connection to skin tone just don't know how to connect any deeper than that. Maybe you just lack that sort of depth, because it just, in today's world, it just shouldn't be a fucking issue. Based on the return to the land interviews that I've watched, these aren't people describing lived, rooted traditions. When they talk about heritage, the reference points are almost always vague, overused, abstract phrases like Western civilization, or in ancient Greece, or classical music, or colonial America. Keywords with no personal connection behind them. I guess that's what I'm trying to get at. You know what I mean? You know what I'm trying to say? So when they say they're just trying to connect and preserve a culture and heritage, I don't buy it, because it doesn't feel like that. It feels like more like, okay, we're trying to construct a culture from scratch, but the only unifying thread here is that we're all white, straight, and not Jewish. I mean, the people that are moving there make it pretty clear in interviews I've seen. They just don't want to risk living anywhere near anyone other. They want to raise their children in a white-only environment with no outside influence. They don't want to risk demographic uncertainty, or, God forbid, there's any sort of cultural mixing. God forbid you have any good food whatsoever. And look, like I said before, I get that there's a sense of comfort in being around people with shared values, morals, traditions, ideals, language, background. And that's, again, the beauty of living somewhere like America. I personally like having so many friends from so many different backgrounds who are willing to share that part of their lives with me. So should this be allowed? In my opinion, yeah. It should be allowed, because in my opinion, and the opinion of many others, you know what? Maybe it's a good thing. Maybe we should let people go off and segregate themselves from the rest of society. Like, if 40 people want to pay a membership fee to live in the woods together and cosplay 18th century Europe or whatever the fuck they're doing, fine. You want to recreate a village in the woods like that one fucking M. Night Shyamalan movie? Go ahead. Okay, go be out there, and then we'll be over here, and then we'll just be over here being fucking normal, not thinking about this type of thing, because that's insane. When I think about the times that we're living in right now and how fast and widespread this kind of ideology is, it feels sinister. I mean, there's already 4 additional return to the land communities that are planning to open in the Ozarks, the Deep South, and Appalachia. And several other groups in the Northwest and South have talked about starting their own as well. But 2025, this last year, was a big year for return to the land. To kick it off, Fruit Haven Eco Village, the community that Peter Sear previously co-founded in Ecuador, publicly alleged that he was misappropriating funds and cryptocurrency. However, Peter has denied any wrongdoing, of course, but it's not exactly comforting to hear financial misconduct allegations about the guy designing the legal structures for your whites-only land experiment. But what does anyone expect from a guy who casually drops 1488 in Telegram chats, which, in case you didn't know, is shorthand for the 14-word slogan and the 8th letter of the alphabet, so 88, HH, Hail Hitler, a well-known white supremacist numeric code. As far as I could tell from what I've read, he's still with Return to the Land. In October of 2025, Return to the Land hosted an event with over 250 attendees, and speakers included Jared Taylor, a longtime white nationalist activist who has been promoting racial separatism since the 1990s, and Thomas Russo, the leader of Patriot Front, one of the most active white nationalist groups in the United States. And as of right now, the Return to the Land website confirms another major gathering is scheduled for April, following, of course, the success of their October event. I mean, this is the crowd that they run with. Again, sinister and embarrassing to me. Embarrassing that you feel that is what you need to do. I don't know, man. I get not wanting to live in a fucking big city. Like, I get the appeal of small town living, but not like that, baby. I just want to go back to the 90s, honestly. What do the Arkansas officials have to say about all this? Not much. Attorney General Tim Griffin has criticized Return to the Land, but also stated that his office hasn't identified any clear violations of state or federal law, meaning that the PMA and LLC model that Peter planned is working exactly how they hoped. Civil rights groups see it differently. Organizations like the Anti-Defamation League and the ACLU argue that return to the land is a clear violation of the Fair Housing Act, and that repackaging segregation as a private club doesn't magically make it constitutional. Some legal experts have called it a textbook attempt to evade federal anti-discrimination protections. But nothing's really come out of it. I mean, just more visibility and attention. Documentary crews have stopped by. I'll link some of my favorites. There's been interview confrontations that were filmed for YouTube, investigative pieces that hit local Arkansas papers. In fact, in December of 2025, The Times actually ran a major expose digging into the settlement, its leadership, and its controversial practices and beliefs. But all of it just seemed to have boosted the brand. Every headline, every debate clip, and I fear even every podcast episode, including this one, that circulates Eric's name just introduces new audiences to the concept of voluntary racial separation. But I digress. This feels very culty to me and is why I want to share it with you guys. There's actually a YouTube channel called Rocco News, and they had a video about this, which is what brought it to my attention, aside from like seeing random posts online here and there. I don't know. Highly recommend watching that. Highly recommend keeping an eye on them, because hopefully that will keep them contained. But as of now, Eric is concerned the timeline to make the expansion work is on the line. He worries that a Democratic presidency in 2028 could threaten the entire project. In interviews, he suggested that if political winds shift, federal pressure could follow. So from his perspective, their main goal right now is to grow as fast as possible before any crackdown. Build enough communities with enough families and enough infrastructure in order to prove and normalize the idea that voluntary racial separation is and should be protected under constitutional free association rights. So we'll see what happens next, I guess. That's it for this week. I'll see you next time. And until next time, if a community is only white, let me tell you, something ain't right. Goodbye.